Okay, let's dive into this. We've got quite a stack of sources here. Bloomberg government, NPR, the CBO, American Immigration Council, all looking at this, well, massive piece of legislation.
One big, beautiful bill act, as it's been dubbed.
Right. And it just scraped through the House, 215, 214, you said, now heading to the Senate.
Yeah, scrape through is definitely the term. It was incredibly narrow, so its path forward is anything but smooth.
And our goal here for you listening is to really cut through the noise on this one. We want to understand what's actually in the bill, especially the immigration parts.
We'll focus on the key proposals that seem to reflect that conservative viewpoint outlined in the sources, and then explore, the economic and social angles people are talking about.
So let's set the stage first. The bill itself, the sources describe it as incredibly broad, right? Not just immigration.
Oh, absolutely. This thing is sweeping. NPR, Charles Schwab, they're calling it comprehensive, basically trying to enact the heart of President Trump's domestic agenda.
So that means touching on big areas, tax policy, major cuts to safety net programs like Medicaid and SNAP.
Yeah, the health insurance for low-income folks and the food assistance program. Big changes proposed there. Plus defense spending, energy policy, and then, of course, a huge section on immigration.
And it's on a fast track, sort of, tied to a deadline.
Well, it's complicated. After that nail-biter in the House, it's in the Senate now, and they're using budget reconciliation.
The special process. Simple majority needed, but lots of rules.
Exactly. Procedural hurdles galore. And it's all linked, as you said, to the debt limit. Treasury says that needs lifting by August.
Which puts a pressure on, is that July 4th deadline realistic?
It seems aspirational, definitely, but it shows the urgency they feel to get something done.
Okay, so let's zoom in on the immigration proposals, because this is where, the bill lays out some very clear priorities, really reflecting that conservative stance we mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. And the sources detail quite a few core elements, clearly stemming from the Trump agenda. The funding levels alone are striking.
Yeah, the American Immigration Council used the word unprecedented for the mass detention and deportation funding.
They did. And Bloomberg government, NPR, they break down the border policy specifics as not just talk.
We're talking huge numbers, like $46.5 billion just for a physical wall.
Just for the wall itself. And then on top of that, you've got billions more for people and tech. Over $6 billion for agents and officers aiming for, quote, complete operational control of the southern border.
Wow. And technology upgrades, too?
Yep, another $5 billion for CBP facilities, screening tech, surveillance upgrades. It's a massive investment in enforcement infrastructure.
And beyond the border itself, Bloomberg mentioned enhanced vetting.
Right, stricter screening for visa applicants for foreign nationals trying to enter, plus significant restrictions on accessing asylum.
Revoking prior policies on asylum, I think it said.
Correct. And Bloomberg also flagged language arguing about birthright citizenship, suggesting it might not automatically apply to, quote, certain persons born here. That's a big one.
And changes to the refugee admissions program, realigning it.
That's the term used, yes. And NPR picked up on a specific detail, a $1,000 incentive payment for migrants who agree to leave the country voluntarily.
A voluntary departure incentive. So, wrapping this section up, what are the stated goals here from the perspective pushing these changes?
Well, the sources are pretty clear on this. The stated aims are basically stop illegal immigration, boost border security significantly, and project an image of being tough on immigration.
Okay, but any policy shift this big, it naturally raises questions about the wider impact. And the sources really show a spectrum of views on the economic and social side.
Definitely. You see the arguments supporting stricter policies, right? Claims that illegal immigration, quote, hurts American workers, burdens taxpayers, strains local services.
Schools, hospitals.
Exactly. And that it costs the country billions annually. That's one perspective laid out.
There's also that argument connecting the recent immigration surge to the cost of living crisis, housing affordability issues.
Right, though. Interestingly, Bloomberg mentions CBO research suggesting that while a surge could pressure housing demand, the CBO itself sees little overall inflation impact over the next decade from it. So, some nuance there.
And the point about state and local governments potentially spending more on services than they collect in taxes from new immigrants.
That's another piece of the argument, yeah.
Okay, so that's one side of the ledger. But the sources also bring up strong counter-arguments, backed by data, about immigrants' economic contributions.
And this is where it gets really complex. The American Immigration Council and others cite figures like Undocumented households paying almost $90 billion in taxes in 2023.
$89.8 billion, yeah. And holding nearly $300 billion in spending power. That's significant.
It is. And if you look at all immigrant households combined, legal and undocumented, the sources say they contributed about $16.80 of every $100 in taxes collected last year. That funds services for everyone.
And undocumented workers often pay into Social Security without being able to claim benefits later, right?
That's often the case, yes. Plus, immigrants are framed as vital in other ways, easing labor shortages, driving innovation.
The sources mentioned their role in healthcare, agriculture, and things like patents and entrepreneurship. Over a third of new patents, nearly 1 in 4 entrepreneurs.
That's the data presented. So, connecting those dots, the counter-argument is that mass deportations would be, quote, an economic disaster.
With huge upfront costs, over $150 billion plus ongoing security spending.
Right. And potential impacts like zero or declining GDP growth, major job disruptions, especially in agriculture.
Which could mean food prices going up.
Potentially, yes. And there's another angle mentioned in some sources, like those Reddit discussions or economic analyses you sent.
The employer demand angle.
Exactly. The idea that the demand for undocumented workers is really driven by employers looking for cheaper labor, so maybe the focus should be more on penalizing them.
Now, beyond those broader points, the bill has specific changes aimed at legal immigrants already here, and this seems to be raising, well, quite a few alarms in the sources.
Yes, this is a really crucial part that sometimes gets lost. We're talking about proposed cuts to safety net programs for refugees, asylum seekers, people here on humanitarian parole.
And the CBO estimated, what, up to 250,000 legal residents could lose SNAP benefit?
That's the estimate cited by NPR in Economic Impacts, yeah. Saving about $4 billion over 10 years, according to the projection.
And then there's healthcare access. Lawfully present immigrants, but not green card holders or citizens, including DACA recipients.
The Dreamers, yeah.
They'd become ineligible for Medicare and ACA coverage.
That's the proposal. Advocacy groups are warning hundreds of thousands could lose vital healthcare access. It's a major concern.
And then the fees. This seems like a huge shift.
It really is. New fees and significantly higher ones, like $1,000 just to apply for asylum where it used to be free.
Wow. And $550 for work permit renewals. Every 6 months sometimes.
That's right. Plus $3,500 to sponsor an unaccompanied child, $1,000 for undocumented individuals paroled in, $500 for TPS applications.
The advocacy groups are calling them astronomical penalties, basically saying people just won't be able to afford to follow the legal processes.
That's the fear, that it blocks access. Now, the counter-argument noted in NPR is that these fees are meant to fund USCIS, the Immigration Services Agency, and the immigration courts.
Okay, so it's framed as funding the system.
But the impact on individuals is still a major point of contention. Oh, and there's also that new 3.5% tax on remittances money sent overseas by non-citizens.
Okay, let's step back for a second. Look at the whole bill, taxes, spending, immigration, all of it. The CBO did some preliminary analysis on the combined economic effects, right? Especially how it shakes out across different income levels.
They did, and it's pretty striking analysis. Overall, the CBO estimates household resources would increase on average over the next decade, mostly because of the tax cuts in the bill.
But, and this seems like a big but, the sources stress this isn't evenly spread at all.
Not even close. The CBO projects that for households in the lowest income decile, the bottom 10%, resources would actually decrease.
By how much?
Roughly 2-4% of their income over the decade. And that's mainly because they lose those in-kind transfers, Medicaid, SNAP, the safety net programs getting cut.
Okay, so the lowest earners see a decrease. What about the highest?
The opposite effect. Households in the top 10% are estimated to see their resources increase by about the same amount, 2-4% of their income.
And that's mainly from the tax cuts?
Predominantly, yes. And here's the kicker. The sources, looking at the CBO report, point out that all the spending cuts combined, they don't actually offset the cost of the tax cuts.
So the bill adds to the debt?
Significantly. The CBO estimates it would increase the national debt by over $3 trillion over the next 10 years.
Which brings us neatly to the Senate. The bill's there now, but its future looks, well, uncertain.
Absolutely uncertain. NPR, Bloomberg government, they're all highlighting the tough negotiations ahead. Even within the Republican Party, there isn't total agreement.
Like the fiscal hawks versus the moderates.
Exactly. Some want even deeper spending cuts, while others are really concerned about hitting those safety net programs so hard.
And lobbyists are swarming, I assume.
Oh, yeah. The sources say they're heavily engaged, especially trying to influence the tax and energy credit provisions. Think about industries built around clean energy credits. They really want to keep those after the House bill moved to phase them out.
Makes sense. And if the Senate does make big changes,
Then it has to go back to the House.
and with that razor-thin 215-214 vote the first time,
Right. Getting it through the House again could be incredibly difficult. So the
Right.
whole process, trying to hit that debt limit deadline, maybe July 4th, maybe later, it's navigating all these internal divisions, procedural hoops, and intense lobbying.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the sources really paint a picture of a massive, complex, and highly contested piece of legislation in this one big, beautiful bill act.
Definitely. It's a major legislative push driven by a clear conservative agenda, especially on immigration enforcement and spending cuts.
But it's facing huge debates, politically, obviously, but also about the real-world economic and social consequences.
You see those stark contrasts everywhere in the sources. The arguments about immigration costs versus the data on tax contributions and labor force needs.
And those really serious concerns about how the changes could impact legal immigrants already here, potentially losing access to health care or SNP, or facing unaffordable fees.
Plus, that CBO analysis showing the benefits flowing upwards in terms of income, while the lowest earners potentially lose out and the national debt goes up significantly, that adds a whole other layer.
So the final shape is really up in the air, dependent on these intense Senate negotiations happening right now.
Absolutely. It could look quite different by the time it's done, if it gets done at all.
Okay, so here's something to think about. Given what the CBO found about how this bill distributes its effects across income levels, and considering all those different economic arguments about immigrants' roles that we found in the sources, how do you think the Senate might try to balance those fiscal goals with the potential impacts on, well, vulnerable people in key parts of the U.S. economy? What questions does that whole balancing act raise for you about where immigration and social policy might be heading next?